All right, so this is the Windsor Public Library Graphic Novel Club. I'm Adam, joined by Alicia and Mike, and we're here to talk about a graphic novel adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, which is really interesting. We were kind of talking about this right before we started. This is something that's done and has been done kind of since the beginning of the comics medium by adapting literary works into comic strips or full-length comic books. But this one in particular is very interesting because I believe this is the first Anne of Green Gables adaptation in the comic form ever.
Actually, wasn't there a manga?
Oh, there could have been a manga. Okay, so I'm thinking more Western comics, but that could be the case.
Fair enough. I know that there is an anime directed by Isao Takahata of Studio Ghibli, but I'm not sure if it made it to graphic novel or not. I could be wrong.
No, I'm going to check that out because that's really interesting. So this may not be the first adaptation, but I think it's one of the first really big publicized Western publications that adapted this story. And we're revisiting someone that we actually reviewed a while ago. That's Brenna Thummler, who did Sheets. And I think the consensus basically was the artwork was pretty good, even very good at some points. And the story, the narrative wasn't great. It was kind of lackluster. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this book, given that she's not writing the material, that it's adapted from Montgomery. You know what? I actually have to admit, before I toss it over to anyone else, I've never read Anne of Green Gables.
Oh,
Neither have I.
Oh, no.
So this is our gateway to it. Alicia, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say, but I'm going to get Mike to talk first, since this is his first exposure to the Anne of Green Gables extended universe. So what did you think about the graphic novel?
I absolutely loved it. I actually just read it in an hour, from 5:30 to 6:30, and I was completely enraptured by it. I love the artwork. Absolutely love the artwork. Obviously, I love the story. I haven't read the book, so I don't know how much of it is left out. You know, I'm sure it did feel a little bit like it was skimming along a little bit, but what was there, I thought was incredible. Like, I can clearly see why it's one of the most popular books in the world, right? And I'm totally looking forward to reading the book and also watching one of the many movie adaptations. So yeah, I absolutely loved it.
Hey, great, thanks, Mike. Mm-hmm. And Alicia, you know, as Mike was saying, he felt like there were some parts that kind of got skimmed through. You know, I got that feeling a little bit too, not that it really stopped my enjoyment of the graphic novel. Being that you are, I don't want to say a diehard fan of Montgomery and Anne of Green Gables, but you kind of, you have the entire set with you, petting it in front of you. She has the entire box set of the Anne of Green Gables collection. So, okay. Graphic novel adaptation of this, what did you think?
So I went to PEI as a child and actually saw the house that this is based on. And outside of the house, there is a theme park. As I use the term theme park loosely, you're not going to find roller coasters, but there is petting zoos, and it's like a whole little village, and people are dressed as the characters, and they reenact scenes from the book. And my favorite one was the one where Anne inadvertently gets Diana drunk. That is one of my favorite scenes, and they reenacted that in the town, and it was absolutely fantastic. Believe it or not, I only very recently read the series about 7 years ago, believe it or not. So when I had gone to PEI to see Anne of Green Gables town, whatever, I had never read the book. And in fact, we ended up picking up the first 3 books in the gift shop there, and still never read it, despite every intention. I read the series, and I read her trilogy, Emily of New Moon, when I was working for Penguin Random House 7 years ago, and it was the 100-year anniversary of Anne of Green Gables, and I had the privilege of editing the ebooks. So that was a wonderful experience. I can't say enough how much I love the series. I can't say how much I can't say enough how much you should go and read at least the first book. If you can, you should absolutely read the whole series. You should definitely read the Emily of New Moon trilogy. It's just wonderful. You're absolutely right. The graphic novel, it doesn't cut out a lot of the important stuff, but it does speed along, where the book is almost like this very nice, slow, relaxing walk through this wonderful, wonderful imagination that Lucy had. And this wonderful little girl, Anne, who feels like a real girl. I don't know if you got that from the graphic novel, but when you read the book, she feels like she could be a real person. And that's one of the things I love so dearly about the series. That said, so this book being very near and dear to my heart, the art was stunning. I absolutely love the art. But I felt like they could have taken certain things a little bit further. One of the things you'll notice about Anne is she prefers Anne to be spelled with an E. And I don't know if you notice in the scene where her teacher writes her name on the chalkboard without the E. Well, there's some point where Anne in the book is complaining to Marilla, and she says, when he says my name, I can hear it. He's not pronouncing the E. And one thing I would have loved to have seen in the dialogue box from the teacher when he says, Anne, get up to the front, stand in the corner, I would have loved to have seen them drop the E from the dialogue box every time the teacher said her name. I feel like that was a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. There are other people that Anne doesn't like, and again, she'll say, I feel certain that they're not pronouncing the E, and I feel like they could have, like, Josie Pye is another one. I feel like they could have dropped the E from her dialogue boxes. But that's just, honestly, I think it did it justice. I don't have a lot to complain about. If I do complain, I feel like I'm nitpicking. But I enjoyed it.
Right.
I did enjoy it.
There's a bit to talk about, and Alicia, you might be able to speak so much to the themes of this book. But, let's put that on the back burner. Themes, meaning of the book. What I want to do is I want to talk more about the medium right now, because we are talking about an adaptation. And, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about adaptations in any form is, did it make sense? So did it make sense for a book to be turned into a film, for example? Did it gain something by being represented in a film that it didn't have in a book? Did something make sense in a play but was lost when it was adapted to a novel? What I'm wondering is, what was gained? Either what you suppose, Mike, because I know you haven't read the book, or what you really believe, Alicia, from having read the novel and the graphic novel. What was gained through putting it into the graphic novel medium?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking either one of you, whoever wants to chime. That was a lot of pre-rambling, but yeah.
Sure. Well, I'll just say that I think what was gained was, I don't know. It's hard. It's kind of self-evident. You can see everything, right? But I think that the art is so good and the colors are so good that it really paints the picture of the environment and the serenity, or whatever you want to call it, of the environment. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that really that really struck me, is it just made me want to live in that time period, in that area, And so I think they did a really good job of getting the feeling. But I can't say that without also saying that it makes me wish it was longer, because I wanted to feel the time that had passed. Like when they're talking about memories of what all the things that happened with her, it was like that was only 15 minutes ago in reading, I kind of wish it was longer. So where the art showed the expanse of the geography, the book was so condensed that it made it feel small, put it that way.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because the novel itself, from what I've read about it, given, again, I haven't read Anne of Green Gables as a novel, is that it's very episodic, that it's a series of episodes of adventures Anne goes through. It's not a great comparison, but I'm thinking of something like The Hobbit, which is not necessarily a straightforward A to B narrative. The overarching narrative is, but it's filled with different episodes, which makes sense for the comic medium, since a serialized medium like a comic, you have individual issues focusing on different adventures. I think this thing could have been published as an ongoing series rather than just a contained graphic novel.
I agree.
I think that is something I don't know if it's lost, because again, I haven't read the source material, but it did feel, you said condensed, and I think that's the best word to describe it as. The main feeling is there, the charm of the environment, especially represented by these really cool blue and green colors throughout the book, is just so placid and calming. It's for the art itself and the coloring, it's worthwhile checking this out, in my opinion. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think that is something that happened in this book. In terms of gaining, yeah, I think the color palette really set the environment and really depicted immediately to an audience something that would take more to describe in prose in a paragraph. Although we're speculating, Alicia, you have more input to say. What do you think was gained or lost by transferring it to this medium?
There was a lot that was lost. The only reason I would say, I mean, aside from the art, of course, I cannot stress enough how much I love the art. But the only thing I feel like is gained is if you have a child who might be a reluctant reader and you hand them this instead of the novel. That's the only thing I feel like is gained, because there's a lot that's lost. There's a lot of characters that merely become shadows of themselves. Oh dear, Diana's aunt, her aunt who comes to visit, she becomes a very large part of the latter portion of the book. The teacher, after the male teacher that Anne has, who is a kindred spirit, she is a very huge influence on Anne throughout the series, throughout the series by and large. Anne also loses something. A little slip of a girl who uses these big words, and you get the sense of it when she's riding home with Matthew from the train station for the first time, and she's just nonstop, just talking nonstop. You don't get a feel for that through the rest of the book because panels are only so big. So you can't have Anne just bantering on and on and on and on because you'd fill half the book. But you really lose that, this little girl with these big ideas. And a very good example of this, and this is something I feel was lost, when she hits Gilbert over the head with the slate, in this she says, "How dare!" But in the novel and in every adaptation, every film or television adaptation I've ever seen of that moment, she says, "You mean hateful boy!" Wham! Right over the head. And again, I don't want to nitpick, but there's something lost in it. You're not getting this little girl with the big rage. Right. You know, you're just, "How dare!" And so,
well, that's what I was wondering is, like, how accurate is the dialogue? To me, try to make it word for word, especially for parts like that. If you're going to adapt a specific sequence, just make it the same. Why change it?
But it is difficult with a series like this because, again, you could have Anne waxing poetic for paragraphs, right?
And it's interesting, too, because so much of the graphic novel is actually quite silent. There's a lack of dialogue in a lot of sequences. So that ends with, like you said, a dialogue-heavy novel. I don't know a ton about it, but I do know that scene with the slate being broken over the boy's head is like one of the most famous scenes from the novel, and it does seem a little bit glanced over compared to all the buildup from what I heard about it, because even I knew about that scene without having read the novel before.
Another thing, like Josie Pye, I think they just mention her very briefly. Like, I think she's there when Anne walks across the roof, and I think she's there when they put her in the boat, Lady of Shalott style, to float her down the river. But you don't get a feel for the Pyes. The Pyes are this notorious family that just annoy the crap out of everyone. And there's a wonderful moment in the second or third book where Anne is a teacher. Stop me if you don't want me to spoil anything.
I'm okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Anne is a teacher, and she has sworn that she will never use corporal punishment. And Marilla and Rachel Lynde are like, oh, no, some kids just need to be smacked. Like, it just needs to happen. Like, and she has one of the Pye children in her class, and this young boy just challenges her at every turn until one day she just turns around and gives him your hand, and she smacks him over the hand with a ruler. And he respects her more for smacking him than he did before. And suddenly he's in line, he's obeying everything she says. And she's like heartbroken that she hit one of her students, right? And Rachel Lynde and Marilla are like, sometimes you just gotta smack them, like here's the lesson. Which is interesting too, because it's a very forward-thinking idea for that time period, 100 years ago, of I'm not going to hit my children, right? Like, so, yeah, I feel like a lot of that's really lost. You're losing a lot of the richness of this community and some of the different people who live in it. Like, they start this betterment society, and they go around petitioning money from the residents to try and make the town look nicer, paint town hall, plant some flowers, cut down a tree that's been dead for so many years, right? And some of the different characters that they meet there, and just, yeah, you really miss out on a lot. Read the book. Not just you two, but anyone listening to this, read the book.
Yeah, I will say, having read this, it piqued my interest. It was a book that I've heard so much about. I never really admittedly felt a pull to go read it. This cemented that for me. I'm actually very intrigued to read more about Anne, to have a better sense of her character. In terms of this graphic novel, though, again, we're talking about the form of it. Something that we always bring up is what's distinct about it. Did it need to be a graphic novel? Did it do anything unique to the medium? I think it was our last meeting, I talked about how sometimes there are certain sequences or panel layouts where it works not only sequentially, but it works because it's a mosaic. It's a complete, compilation of all these panels that work together as well as working as parts of a sequence. There is a section, I'm not sure if you have a copy available with you, but I'm going to reference this digital page 4748 from the Hoopla copy of this. It's a wordless section. Sorry.
I'm just going to find it quick.
Yeah, it's 4748.
Okay. Okay.
So actually, sorry.
No, I was actually just going to ask because, again, I really like these sequences. I think the panel layout is great. I love the color palette. I love how it works as a composite of these images as well as working sequentially. My question is, though, is it unique? Is it anything that's specific to a graphic novel that can't be done in a film or some other medium?
What's funny is because I read it the other way, I didn't notice any of that, but now I'm going to have to look at this for a second here.
Mm-hmm.
So while Mike's looking at it, I'm going to just comment on this because it's funny. This is one of the things that's lost. So before that panel, Marilla says to her, you must make a good, sensible impression, right? Mm-hmm. And you see her covering her hat with wildflowers. She shows up to the house where she's supposed to meet that person. Can't find them, so she continues on to church on her own. You see in one of the panels in the top right corner, some girls are whispering behind Dad's back. And then you turn the page and you see Marilla calling her. And I was fully waiting for Marilla to give her shit. But then you turn the page and she says, oh, we're going to have someone to visit who wants to meet you. But what happens in the original book is Anne causes quite a scandal by wearing these wildflowers on her hat into church like that. And Marilla is kind of like, oh my God, you've embarrassed me by doing this, right? And everyone just kind of has to go, oh, that's just Anne, that's just her way, right? Where it's funny that they chose to show that, but nothing comes of it.
Mm.
Yeah, and I do think there's a slight implication going on here where in the top panel of page 48, the top right panel, there's a group of girls kind of standing around. It looks like they're secretly talking to each other, looking at Anne. So it's kind of implying that they're either making fun of her or that she is causing some type of scene. But like you said, Alicia, there's no other fallout happening from that.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the panel layout and in terms of just the art itself, again, for this dialogue-less section of the book, do you think it does anything unique for a graphic novel?
Well, I mean, one thing you could say is that, like, design-wise, the top of the page almost mirrors the bottom of the page, right? You're looking at a hill with the church. But then you have those three windows in the church, and those three middle panels, you could argue they sort of mimic the design of those windows. Like, you're seeing those three panels as if you're looking into the church, right? So in that sense, they mirror the architecture and like the geography, you could say.
I like that idea. What do you think, Alicia?
I agree. There's another sequence of panels that creates kind of a mosaic that I think might be a better example of what you're talking about. It's the Hoopla page 69.
Okay.
And if you turn to it, I'll give you a minute. But I think I like the way this one creates the scene a little bit better. You see up above the girls having tea, but then you see the boat, and you see the water, you see the girl's hand reaching for the lily, and you see her being grabbed so that they stop her from tumbling in. And I think I like that sequence almost a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Because it tells kind of a small story, and it's completely silent. And I just like the composition of it. The boat, the lily pads, the girl almost tumbling into the water. I don't know. I don't know if that's something completely unique that couldn't be done in any other medium. With Anne walking to the church and picking the flowers, I feel like it's one of those quiet moments where if you tried to replicate that in a film, it might be a little bit boring because it might carry on too long. But having these short little panels, you can kind of infer what's happening between without having to spend 20 minutes watching a little girl walk to church. I don't know.
Well, I think it's also the difference between a photograph and a video, right? Like, even though I love video and I love taking videos of, say, my family, my nephews, sometimes it's almost like you can get more out of a photo because it's like you can just stare at it and stare at it and stare at it and imagine the moments that were right before it or right after it.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas in a video, the movement takes up all of your attention. And so it's like you're saying about a movie, the movie would take so much time to show, like this would be like 5 seconds, whatever. But with this, you can look at it, even though it's only one image, you can actually look at it longer, soak it all in, then go to the next one, soak all that one in. So it's actually really different.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah, but no, I think that's true. I struggled with this a little bit because I tried to identify things that I felt couldn't really be done in any other medium. Maybe it's not even that they couldn't be done. It's just done more effectively in this medium.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. And I think it is more effective. I would prefer that sequence that Alicia pointed out, where I get to see the composite of all those different panels rather than it animated, even in this style. As much as I love the color palette and I love the character designs, the physical character designs of everyone in the book, I think there's just something powerful about seeing all these panels juxtaposed with each other. But I do want to bring up one instance, one that I actually thought was very unique, and that was digital page 15 on Hoopla. And What I think is unfortunate about reading a digital copy is that you don't get the same sort of flip a page effect that you do with a physical bound graphic novel. So on page 15, you have that sequence where Anne is being drove across the bridge to the house that she's going to live. She's talking and talking, and you do get this great sense with how cluttered the panels are with her word balloons, that she really is talking so much, which I thought was great. And then you turn the page, or you go to digital page 16/17 for a double page spread, which as a rule I usually hate. This was an exception. You open it up and it's this wide environmental shot of them underneath these trees with this purple foliage and this great speckling of shadow and light. And the silence, I think, is effective here. Contrasting the previous page with all the dialogue to this, yes, in a film you could have a character talking and then have silence, but I think it's a different effect when you're not actually seeing text on the page for a turn like this. That I thought was potentially unique.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. And it's funny because even in the book, when they walk through that path, it's like the only time she's quiet on the entire drive home. There's another page that I want to point out to you both. Page 55, digital page 55. And you see the girls in their clubhouse, and I love the way the speech bubbles just wind their way around through the trees and around each other, and you get this great sense of a lazy afternoon and just sitting and talking with your best friend in the middle of a nice hot summer day.
Which page is that?
Digital page 55.
Yeah, I'm seeing that page 55. I love that page too. Again, there's... Oh, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
I was going to say quickly, the other thing that... because I used to draw a lot in high school, and one of the weirdest things I discovered was that when you're drawing on a two-dimensional surface, you are, in some ways, you're imitating a camera lens, right? So like where you put the figures as far as foreground, background, all that stuff, you're mimicking a type of lens. So when I was a kid, I didn't know the difference between a 50 millimeter and a 200 millimeter, blah, blah, blah. I didn't understand any of that stuff, right? But a lot of times in this book, I noticed that it's almost like, when you take your phone and you take a photo this way versus when you take a phone and take a photo this way, you can see in this picture that she's really stressing the height of those trees and how small the girls are, and how far they are at the bottom of the picture. And I think it's really thoughtful to do it that way, because I noticed that a lot throughout the book, where depending on the size of the panel, it's not like she would have composed it the same way if it was wide. I think she really used the dimensions of the panel to help convey the idea that she wanted, which I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say, I was very critical of Thummler as a writer from Sheets, and I'm not apologetic for that. I am still critical of that book. However...
There's a sequel, by the way.
Oh, I saw. Maybe it will be better. Who knows? But I will say, as a layout artist, as an illustrator, as a visual composer, I thought even with questionable prose, the book was narratively great for her art. And this one, that sequence right there that Alicia's pointing out,
digital page 24.
24 is so solemn, so melancholy. It's amazing. And I just think she does this thing with her art. Even though it has this exaggerated, almost cartoony style, it works perfectly. And yeah, I have to say, I don't have any criticisms over the art direction in the book.
One more.
Oh, okay.
Digital page 36. Where you see Anne, she's sitting on her bed reading, and the top right panel, you see her squeeze her eyes shut and in the whole bottom sequence, you see her in this opulent gown in this room that is just so
I love
expensive.
that. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Mhm.
Sorry, please carry on, Adam.
No, it's great. Really, you're just you're just proving what I'm saying, that it's just so effective. I think in terms of telling a story, there's so many sequences here where Marsden, who is the adapter for the words and the dialogue, didn't need to do anything, and they didn't. They left it silent. And I think if you wanted a visual representation of Anne of Green Gables, really Thummler does justice to it. I almost feel in a way that the graphic novel pretty much could have been silent without any dialogue, and you would still understand the story beat for beat, which is always a great sign of a graphic novel illustrator, artist, whatever you want to title them. So, there's more we can talk about in terms of the format, the art, but before we go on to talk about anything else, I've been bringing up so many questions. I've been trying to stir up conversation. I don't want to take anything away from you guys. Are there any points you want to bring up about the graphic novel?
I don't know if there's anything we haven't touched on yet, to be honest. Only that I guess I wish there were more. I mean, I'd like to know what the circulation is of this book. Even though it is abbreviated from the novel, it's one of those books that I wish everyone had access to,
Mm-hmm.
And I know that some graphic novels make their way into schools because of Scholastic and all that stuff, but I would hope that this is one of them.
Likewise.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'm going to comment on is I wish that they had broken this up into 2 volumes. Maybe finish the first volume when she cracked Gilbert over the head with the slate, so that they could have included more and lengthened it a little bit more, because I would have loved to have seen her treatment of different scenes and different characters.
Mm-hmm. I do agree, and I think this is something like even Mike was mentioning a little bit, and I agree. I think this story just lends itself to a serial form of storytelling. For the life of me, I don't really understand why it was just contained as a single graphic novel. And I think this is such a compliment, too, because usually I'm all about brevity. You did a great book. Don't make a sequel. Don't make a series. You're going to ruin it. Just keep it as it is. This is one of those where I would say, no, I want more, which, again, for me, says a lot.
Well, I wonder if there's plans to do the other books in the series, so I wonder if that's why they kept this one short. But I get the sense that this is meant to be a standalone. So again, why not break it up into 2? Or were they worried that it wouldn't sell as well, so they wanted to just have it out and be done with it? I wonder.
Yeah, it's tricky because you also have to look at sort of the bureaucratic elements of it too. I mean, they obviously had the rights to make an adaptation, and the question is, did they want to risk having the rights for just the first volume, potentially losing it if they didn't meet sales, or if anything happened to those copyrights or to the rights for adaptation? I mean, we won't ever know, but that is something I consider a lot when it comes to these sort of works.
Now, something interesting, Mariah Marsden, who, what's the word, edited this or wrote it? I don't know.
Let's say adapted it, because it was her writing, yeah.
Adapted is the word I was looking for. So she's going on to, I believe it's being published this year, she's going on to do another one of my favorites as a graphic novel, and that's The Secret Garden. But Brenna Thummler will not be the artist for that one, and I'm rather disappointed about that.
Huh. Do you know who the illustrator is going to be?
Let me check. Okay, here we go.
I'm also trying
The illustrator is Hannah Lukefeld. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong.
I'm not too familiar. Actually, I'm not familiar at all with them. So,
Mm.
well, we'll see. I mean, we might end up getting that book on Hoopla, so maybe we could end up reading it.
It's out June 15th. And have either of you read The Secret Garden? Because you should totally read that one as well.
No.
I did watch the movie when I was young. I'll say that. Every 90s
The
kids
movie's
go
good.
to. I've seen a movie. Yeah.
The movie's really good.
Okay, so we talked about the medium, we talked about the art, but the core of the story, I guess now we kind of look at it from the overall narrative perspective. What is the story really about, and who would it appeal to? In your opinion, Alicia, I'm sure you have a lot to say about it. I'm curious what Mike has to say first, just because this is your first experience with the story. Again, what do you think the overall meaning of the story is, its themes, and who would you recommend it to?
Well, honestly, I would recommend it to anyone, to everyone. I can't imagine someone not enjoying this. As far as what the meaning of the story is, I mean, the go-to answer would be a coming of age, but that's like 90% of all stories. Not really, but you know what I mean? It's like such a common thing.
Yeah.
But if you want to zero in a little bit more, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I think I'd have to read the novel to really get into like the deeper themes of it. But I think that's what it really is. It's just coming of age, and yeah, I would have to say that's what it is. And I mean, there's obviously there's some feminist undertones to it as well, right? Like I think she's a little bit ahead of her time, Anne.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something really important as well. I would like to explore if there's anything uniquely Canadian about it, because I'm definitely not an expert on Canadian literature. So I'd like to know, for someone who knows more about American and Canadian literature, if there's anything about this that makes it uniquely Canadian.
Well, you've come to the right place. Well, I did study both Canadian and American literature in university, and I believe, Adam, you were an English major, weren't you?
I was, yes. But I was no expert in Canadian lit. I'm going to admit that.
Oh, no.
From what I remember, there's even conversations about exactly what does Canadian literature mean, or what does it represent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in this book, if I give my 2 cents, it might be setting, and beyond that, maybe themes of even trying to define yourself, because that's something I notice in a lot of Canadian literature. Who am I? If we're looking at it through a national lens, I'm not American, I'm North American, but I don't exactly fit into, the idea of Americanism, the American dream, that whole notion of the grand expansion, the mythology behind America doesn't pertain to my Canadian identity. So how do I define myself?
Mm-hmm.
I notice that's a recurring question that happens a lot, maybe not on the surface, but subtextually in so many Canadian books. I think here, literally we have Anne trying to figure out who she is because she's an orphan. She's adopted. She has a very firm sense of her personality, but she's trying to figure out how that works in this new community. And as strong as she is, there's also a lot of points where she does grow and learn, even with her relationship with, and oh my God, whose head did she break the slab over? I can't remember the character's name. Gilbert, yeah, of course. Yeah, even that was character growth and kind of understanding. But beyond setting and that theme of, self-exploration, which, like you said, like a Bildungsroman is the book of self-discovery growing up. It's so much literature. It's so rampant. I guess this is my rambling way of saying, I don't know. I just wasted 5 minutes. Alicia, give us an actual answer.
Okay, yes. Absolutely. This is a coming of age story. I would 100% recommend it to little girls who are shy and are just trying to make friends, maybe have a big imagination, big ideas, because I think one of the things that makes this book and this character so wonderful are that so many girls, and maybe boys too, so many people can identify themselves in Anne. And me, I wish I had read this book 20 years ago, because I feel like I would have gotten so much out of it. You know, a lonely little girl who doesn't have many friends, has a big imagination, and has so many big ideas. You know, I feel like I really would have loved to read this book and read it over and over and over again. I'm glad I did come to it. Even though I came to it later in life, I'm so glad that I came to it, and I still love and treasure this character. Definitely, it's a coming of age. You see the growth so much more in the novel. Because, too, I think the first, is it the 3 or 4 books? Like, the entire series follows Anne throughout her life, ending with her having children and her raising her children. So it's a wonderful series to read in that sense as well, because the whole thing is just watching people grow up and start families and form communities. And one of the big things that I really think makes this book Canadian is the community itself. And you don't get that sense in the graphic novel so much as you do in the novel, of the small town of Point Pelee Islanders, and it's us against the mainlanders. Even it's not even just us against the Americans. It's no, we're Point Pelee Islander or Pelee Island. Oh my God, Prince Edward Islanders, not Point Pelee. Oh my God, no.
Your South Ontario-ness is showing.
Oh, it is. It is. One of the inherently wonderful things about this novel and Emily of New Moon is it's semi-autobiographical. So if either of you are interested, I have a great podcast that you can listen to. It's all one podcast. It's not like several hours. And it's about the life of Lucy Maud Montgomery, and you can see a lot of the parallels between her life and Anne's life and her life and Emily's life. Emily of New Moon is far more autobiographical than Anne of Green Gables is. But I would argue makes it Canadian is just the community and how they rally together with each other. Not that I'm saying that Americans don't do that, but I feel like you see that more in Canadian literature, where in American literature, you have figures like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer who are kind of striking out on their own and trying to do things on their own, where in Canadian literature here you have this little girl who's an orphan who's trying to find herself.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point, because there's that American exceptionalism that happens so much, you know, in real life and literature, where everyone's trying to prove their individuality, prove what makes them so unique and distinct. And, you know, it's not even just classic characters like the Twain ones you mentioned. I'm thinking of like Holden Caulfield as an example of a more contemporary, relatively contemporary, 70 years old character, but, you know, someone who also represents the individuality. Anne is an individual, but she is based in this community, and her identity is communal. I also want to bring up something else I thought was interesting. This novel is set just 3 years after Prince Edward Island entered into the Confederacy.
Not Point Pelee.
Not Point Pelee, no. So again, like, not that I think this may have been intentional on Montgomery's part, but I think there might also be that notion of, as Canada was forming, becoming a nation, really defining itself and trying to figure out, who am I? I'm not a French colony. I'm not an English colony. I'm not the United States. Who am I to be? Anne's path is kind of, in a way, representative of that. Not that it's a complete parallel, but I think there's definitely elements of that happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, in terms of any like very deep philosophical points that this book brings up, I mean, it's a coming of age story. I think it's profound. And like Mike said, there's dozens, well, not dozens, there's hundreds, thousands of coming of age stories. But damn, this is a good one. This is one of the best I've read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, in terms of, you know, just wrapping up the conversation, I don't have too much more to say about the book other than I thought it was gorgeously illustrated. Anne is such a charming character. I thought she's so funny and so fleshed out, even as much as she can be exaggerative. That was very endearing. I never felt annoyed by any of the characters, and it was kind of like a nice breath of fresh air considering everything people have been going through over the past year. This is great comic book therapy.
I agree.
Mhm.
It also makes me want to like support the team, and like I want to be buying this stuff, and paying for it so that these artists get my money,
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Mm-hmm. And I will say again, I'm not just trying to pick on her because Thummler, I think you're a great artist. I just really wish that she focused more on the visual storytelling rather than writing scripts because, again, like in terms of the artwork, I find it flawless here.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas even the artwork in Sheets was good, but no, it wasn't even good. It was great. But I was so distracted by shortcomings of the narrative.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. The art in this was top notch, absolutely top notch. And this was such a treat. Thank you for picking this, Adam. Seriously.
Yes, I can't believe I've never read the novel, and I'm already looking up the movie adaptations, and I'm already planning to watch the 1985 miniseries.
Good. There is a 2-hour YTV movie adaptation, I guess, that has, I think it's Martin Sheen in it.
Oh, wow.
So I want to check that out just for that. The most American actor that you can get for the most Canadian film, but, it's neither here nor there. Just wrapping up again, I thought the book was great, and judging from everything you guys said, it sounds like a resounding endorsement. Go check out the book if you can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Reading the novel. Absolutely reading the novel.
Yeah. So what we're going to read next is definitely some darker fare. What we're going to be exposed to is not an adaptation, but kind of a biographical work of someone who worked on something that I think people from our respective generations probably enjoyed. Who here remembers the 1990s Batman animated series?
Me. I know what you're going to pick.
Okay, what am I going to pick?
It's the Vertigo. I don't remember what it's called, but it's the story of, is it Paul Dini getting mugged?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So it is Dark Knight, a true Batman story. This is by Paul Dini and illustrated by Eduardo Rizzo. And this is, as Mike said, a real-life story of this writer for the animated series of Batman, as well as Tiny Toon Adventures, and just him overcoming the trauma of being mugged. And have you read this before, Mike?
Actually, no. So I'm super excited about this.
Cool. Excellent. And you haven't read it yet, have you, Alicia?
No, I have not.
All right, cool. So then hopefully you will enjoy this. We're going to find out, though, either way next month, where we talk about Dark Knight, a true Batman story. And thank you for joining us for this session of the WPL Graphic Novel Club. Mike, Alicia, thank you so much.
All right. See ya.